Welcome to today's presentation on introducing your child to the school community using the Student Snapshot format. My name is Barb Ziemke and I'll be your presenter today. I've been an advocate and project coordinator at Pacer Center for 9 years, and part of my work here is authoring materials for parent training, including the Introducing Your Child to the School Community piece that we're going to be using as a basis of today's presentation. I'm the parent of a young adult son with a developmental cognitive disability, and I currently serve as the co-chair of Minnesota's State Special Education Advisory Panel. In today's training session for parents, you'll learn why it's important for parents to share information with the school, how developing a student snapshot will benefit you and your child, how to create your child's student snapshot, and then how to use the student snapshot to help your child succeed at school. Let's begin with the why it's important for you to share information about your child with the school. Long after the last teacher or therapist has disappeared from your child's life, you'll be there to support and encourage your child. Your active participation as a member of the IEP team will help to ensure that your child receives the education he or she needs and deserves. You are the expert on your child. Your in-depth, ongoing relationship provides you with that wide-angle view of the child. Professionals, very appropriately, often see the child through a lens of their particular discipline or field. But as parents, we have the wide-angle view. Another reason is that parents are really the only continuous members of their child's IEP team. You know what has worked and hasn't worked over time, and you'll be that one constant factor that will remain the same through multiple transitions at school and in life, while generally professionals will change from year to year. The parent is the IEP team member who represents and advocates solely for that individual child. And while school personnel are great at advocating for the needs of the children that they teach, they have to be concerned about all of the children. Whereas you, as the parent, can really be concerned with the one child and meeting their unique needs, your child. And probably biggest reason of all is that you are the keeper and communicator of high expectations for your child. No one cares and no one will care as much about your child's success as you do. So think about how have you gained so much information about your child? How do you know so much? Parents learn about their child's disability from doctors and other medical professionals at all those appointments we keep, from teachers and school personnel and the testing that they do, from books that we read. Many of us scour the internet and attend parent training workshops and conferences like today's training. We talk with other parents, which is a great source of information. And we learn as parents about our child's unique needs by living with the child and observing him or her in lots of different environments and situations. And again, you know what works there and what doesn't work. And because of your personal relationship with your child, you, of all people, are in the best position to communicate with them about their interests and their preferences, their dreams and their goals, their challenges and the way they perceive them, and then what they find helpful in addressing those challenges. As the expert on the child, you have valuable information to share with the people who are going to be interacting with your child during the school day when you can't be there to give them that information. Some school staff members will attend the IEP meetings, but really when you think of everyone within the school that interacts with your child, many of them do not have the opportunity to be part of those in-depth discussions about your child. And IEP case managers can be reluctant to share student-specific information with other school personnel because they're concerned about confidentiality. And because families have lots of different viewpoints on how much information to share about their child and with whom, this is an opportunity for parents to take the lead when it comes to providing kind of personal information about their child at school. The student snapshot will benefit your child and you in several ways. When you're able to put a face rather than a label on your child, you will be helping others to be more understanding and to respond more appropriately to your child in the school setting. You'll also be helping them to view your child more positively, and we'll take a look at specifically how that happens in the snapshot. And you'll be helping others to interact more successfully with your child at school. Knowing that a child processes information more slowly and needs more time to respond will help someone who's interacting with them slow down and have patience to wait for their response rather than hurrying ahead or rushing through the conversation. Another example would be for instance, the cafeteria worker who's trying to engage your child in conversation as they go through the lunch line. If that person is not aware that this particular child can't hear out of their left ear, she may view that lack of response when she speaks to him as being rude or disrespectful or unfriendly, and discontinue those attempts to talk with the child when, if she had that information, she might be able to figure out a different way to communicate during that time. In addition, the parent will gain from this process of developing and using a student snapshot. Not only will it benefit the child, it benefits the parent in a couple of kind of significant ways. The process of actually going through this will help you, as you are required to kind of think through intentionally some of these aspects of your child. You'll come to be able to determine what's really most important to you and your child. And then you'll develop a better ability to express those concerns and expectations in more clear and concise ways. And we're going to be giving you later in the how-to section some actual examples of the kinds of statements to include on the template that will help you in communicating more effectively. And then once it's developed, the snapshot itself can help you stay focused on your priorities as you participate in planning your child's individualized education program. Even in choosing what goals and service to include in the IEP plan, you'll be able to ask yourself during that process, do these things match up with the snapshot of my child? So let's get started on the how-to of creating the student snapshot. As parents, I know I'm guilty of this. We sometimes think that the more information we give people, the better. Well, in this case, when you're sharing information with the school, sometimes this is a case where less is actually more. And so because time is often in short supply for both you and school personnel, it's important to find a way to deliver information quickly and concisely. And what we know is that lengthy reports, multiple page emails, and prolonged telephone conversations are not very efficient, and they're rarely very effective. One-page written materials are much more likely to be read and remembered. We know that people take a very short amount of time when they're looking at a particular piece of written material to size up whether or not they think they have time to read it. And so by doing the things here, like using just one side of a page, using a bulleted list instead of big paragraphs, white space is good too, using terminology that everybody understands, that isn't those medical terms or school jargon that a lot of people within the school are not going to have familiarity with. And then when there's something personal about it, think of, you see something with a photograph, especially the photograph of a child, can encourage you to pick that up and see what's the story part of this, what's the personal part of this. And so our template is designed with this in mind so that you'll come up with something that people will actually probably read and use that information. So there's some kind of tips with this that are going to be woven throughout the development of the template. One is that you really want to prioritize in all of what we're going to talk about. We want to include no more than 5 or 6 points in each of the areas on the template. And you really want to stay away from trying to duplicate your IEP. That's a more comprehensive document. It has a whole host of other factors that it needs to address. This is something separate that is going to be the snapshot piece. So it's only going to include only a few of the most essential considerations that all staff people at school should be aware of. And then in addition to prioritizing, we want to keep it simple. So again, what we just talked about, we want to keep it simple by the amount of information that we share and the way we share that information. And then above all, this is an opportunity to make it personal to your child. So be sure to include a current photo of your child and keep the information to information that applies to your child more than it does to the disability in general. People have access to tons of information on autism spectrum disorders or on ADHD. They read it in the media. Information about the disability is not as important as information about your child and the way they are affected by that disability. So it really is the key, is the impact of the disability on your child and really putting a face on your child. I want to show you a picture of the snapshot. And I want to mention here too, if you started viewing this presentation not having a copy of our written materials on this topic, if you go to the PACER website publications page, you will find the publication number C160. And those are PHP numbers, C160, and you will find the information on how to develop the template, as well as a template form that you can use online on the computer to just fill in the blanks and add your photo. And now I'm going to take a few minutes to explain just how to fill in each of those sections. We're going to start with section number 1. And this is the student at a glance. And here on the slide, you'll see that the bulleted points that you're going to include here. Beyond the disability, every child has a unique personality. So for this section, in an overall way, before you get started, you want to ask yourself a few questions. Think about your child. We're going to talk about Joe because Joe is the student on our sample template. But what makes Joe unique and special? What factors lead to positive experience and responses for him? What makes him happy? What gets him upset? By providing this information, you're going to give the school tangible ideas of things like topics to discuss in conversation, activities to incorporate into Joe's day, as well as environments or responses to be avoided. So I'm going to give you some sample statements from our sample that's included with our handout of Joe. And this is Joe Smith. Joe Smith's current interests include SpongeBob SquarePants, playing the drums, and twins baseball games. He likes computers, electronics, art, and media materials. He dislikes noisy environments and touching or tasting unfamiliar foods. Joe is motivated by using a coaching style of instruction, setting and reaching goals, using high fives, humor, good-natured teasing, social interaction opportunities, and getting grades and awards. Joe is turned off or discouraged by stern or angry responses or being singled out publicly. Now, I just want you to think of if somebody had that information about a child, I think you can imagine some of the things they would either want to proactively do or proactively or intentionally avoid in Joe's day. And I just want to remind you, and I'm going to do that throughout this, that those 3 tips are important in every section, which are you're going to need to prioritize, keep it simple, and keep it personal. So let's look at section number 2. And this is perhaps the most important section because we're talking about strengths. And building on student strengths really is the key to success. And this is your opportunity to highlight those things that Joe can build on in his educational programming and in his life. We're going to look first, just think about some general questions to get going on this page. Think about what would people say that Joe kind of has going for him? What things come naturally or easily for Joe? And then what about Joe do other people comment most positively about? And then what are those things that people seem surprised when they learn that Joe can do them? When you share information about your child's strengths, school professionals are going to be able to create opportunities that tap into those strengths and build on success. When I think about this, I think about kind of with my hair. I have naturally curly hair, and I remember I wanted a change in style, and I talked to the hairdresser about what could I do different with my hair. I've been wearing it the same way for so many years, and the comment was, you can either go with what you've got, or you can continually work against the curly hair and be working very hard to straighten it, but it's always going to end up curly anyway. And some people really like curly hair. And I think about that with kids and students that, if we find those strengths, rather than working counterproductive to them, we can go with them, enhance them, and use them as kind of a launching pad for some of the other skills that they need to acquire. So think about some of these things as I give you some examples of Joe. Think about your own child and what maybe some statements would be that you would make on your template. For instance, Joe has a good auditory memory and he learns best by listening. Joe is musical. He has a real musical intelligence about him. He has rhythm and rhyme, and those things, including melodies, help reinforce learning for him. Joe is really cooperative. People always point that out. He works well in teams or in groups, takes instruction very well, and responds. Joe also is a student who understands limits and is able to follow rules well. He uses a laptop computer independently, and this would be one of those surprising things about Joe, because later we're going to learn that he has very poor fine motor skills, and there could be an assumption that he wouldn't be good at using a computer. But he is, and he enjoys it, and it's motivating, so we would want to include that as a strength. And then for Joe, he brings to the mix a very supportive and involved family. So I hope that right now, as we're going through this in a kind of hypothetical way, it's triggering some ideas about your own child and what you might want to include. So sections 1 and 2 really tell us who the student is. Section 3 is going to tell us what the student needs. And so these are what we call the challenges. And in this section, you're going to consider that impact of the disability on your child and how it affects what he or she needs at school. So you're going to begin this part by really considering now what things are difficult for Joe and when does he require more help than the typical child his age in that setting. What kind of support actually works best for Joe? And then be considering what are those areas where the gap between Joe and his same age peers are the biggest gap, because those are usually clues to the significance of the challenge. And remember, we're prioritizing here. So, I know that for some of you, you might have a child who has one particular challenge in one particular area of development or academic skills. Others of you might have a child and you have challenges in multiple areas, and it can be overwhelming to try to address all of that at once. So the real key is to be thinking again, where is this most significant and where is it most significant in an impact at school, and then prioritize which things are most important to highlight. So in considering this, there are some areas that you might want to just consider whether or not this is a priority area of challenge for your child. I'm just going to give you some ideas of what those areas are to consider. Think about whether or not your child has needs in the area of communication, behavior, academic skills, social skills. Perhaps it's in the area of emotional development. Maybe there's mental health needs. What about sensory issues that people will need to be aware of? Information processing or thinking skills. Gross motor, which is the large muscle group of motor skills, that might be around coordination. Or perhaps the need is in the area of those fine motor or small muscle skills. Maybe there are motor planning issues. It could be functional or self-help skills. And always consider what are those unique health or safety concerns for the child. And as you consider this list, and maybe you're jotting some things down, like I want to remember to include that in my template. Again, you want to find ways to, in a simple way, without too much jargon or medical language, convey quickly the most important piece of that information on your template. So here are some examples for Joe. Joe has no hearing in his left ear, so speakers need to sit, stand, and walk on his right side. That would have helped the cafeteria lady to have known that in our example earlier. Joe has a younger developmental age, so he needs close adult supervision for vulnerability and safety, especially during unstructured times like recess, lunch, and hall passing times. Joe has poor fine motor skills. He needs extra time and adapted materials and sometimes personal assistance when writing or drawing and with some self-help activities. And then Joe has poor large muscle coordination and balance, so he needs extra time and more space going up and down stairs and moving through school hallways. So we've looked at what your child needs now, and in section 4 and 5, we're going to look at what you want for your child and what he or she may want for themselves. This is our section on long-range goals, and this is big picture kind of thinking here about what do you want for the long haul as far as what's important in Joe's school experience. And so it's important to keep in mind here that every family has its own culture and values that influence their priorities. And perhaps most important of all in our discussion of using this template as a vehicle to communicate with schools is that there's no way for schools to know what families do want and expect unless the family somehow tells them. And that's hopefully what this snapshot gives us the opportunity to do. So think about, what do you want to see happen by the time your child graduates, or what do you want to see happen every year in education? Here are some examples of some long-range goals to include on the template from Joe. Joe's parents say they would like to see him participate as much as possible in school with the people with whom he will live in the community as an adult, his regular education peers. They want to see him reach his potential in basic skill areas of reading, math, and written language. They want him to develop age-appropriate behavior and social skills. They want him to learn what he has to offer to other people and to feel a responsibility to make a contribution. And they want to see him increase his attention span and tolerance for mentally and physically challenging activities. Now, Joe's a particular kid with particular needs. Your child's needs and goals can be totally different and should be, and that's why you need the snapshot. Even within the same disability, people are going to want and expect different things for their child's life. But then, once you kind of convey this big picture thinking, long range, now we want to just look on this snapshot at one school year. And you're going to be updating and revising this every year. But now it's more the slice of Joe's life for this school year. And so we really want to consider, where do you want to focus your efforts this school year? You can't focus on everything at the same time. So what do you really want to focus on? And what's most important for Joe to accomplish this year? I sometimes think, just think if there were only 3 things we could make sure happen this year, what would those be for Joe? And then based on the grade level and Joe's unique needs, what skills might be at a critical period of development? This can help you focus. Perhaps the child has just really, they have a learning disability and they just last year really started to learn how to decode words. It kind of cracked the puzzle, but they're behind their peers. And so now this next year really want to focus more time and energy on those reading skills, because this is a grade level where reading is at a critical period of development. So kind of think those factors through as you're thinking about what you want to include. I'll give you some template examples from Joe. Joe is at a period on this particular sample where he has just started to really get the whole reading piece of this. So for this year, the focus is to make measurable progress in reading, especially decoding. I also have a goal to learn appropriate conversational skills with his peers. And then this was one that Joe really felt strongly about, to make a friend with whom to connect outside of school. So Joe was having socially at school, kids were relating well to him and interacting with him, but he didn't have a friend to come over to his house or to call him or to have a sleepover with. And so enhancing that through the use of developing skills and creating opportunities to facilitate that at school was really a focus that they wanted to see for Joe. So think about your child and what this coming school year you would like the focus to be on. And once you've completed this snapshot, it's time for you to put it to use. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Some of the ways might be to introduce your child to a new school or new school staff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the second point, which is you could use this as a tool to share information with the IEP team at your annual meeting. It's a really great idea to ask that this is included in the folder that a teacher or a paraprofessional has for substitutes, because it's a very common thing to have substitutes at school, and it's also very common for that to be difficult for both the substitute and the child in knowing what expectations are realistic and what their needs are. This is a great handy tool to provide. And then think about all the adults who interact with your child at school and which ones might really benefit from this. And I'm going to give you some ideas to consider that sometimes people don't think about, but what about the librarian or media center person? The school secretary is often, kind of the hub of communication at the school when the kids go down to the office. Or the school nurse, particularly if this is a child who goes to the nurse for medication during the school day. People often overlook custodians, but in many schools, especially elementary schools, custodians are in the halls with students, interacting with them, and if they have more information, they can do that more positively and appropriately. Then those specialist teachers, like the art and the music teacher, often don't come to the IEP team meetings, but they have the student in their class. So it's important to think about who does your child see during the day. A playground supervisor could be a huge one, because recess and those times when are unstructured times are sometimes very challenging if the individuals out on the playground don't really know much about the student. And then again, you could ask to have this, actually a copy of this, in the student's file in the classroom for other people who are new to refer to. It's important in all of this to involve your child. Depending on your child's needs and their age, they could be involved a lot or just a little in discussions about what information to share in this and who to share it with. For students with significant needs, who are included in the regular classroom, some families find it helpful to share this snapshot with parents of their child's classmates. And older students sometimes want to share it with students in the regular mainstream classes. They might have a peer mentor who works with them. So it can be a handy tool in lots of ways, but it really depends on your child's age, their needs, and how they feel about you sharing this information. So be sure to include them as much as is appropriate in that discussion. And you can also ask your IEP team for information about who they think it might be a helpful piece to share. I find it really helpful at IEP team meetings because if you're a parent, sometimes you have so much you want to talk about, your concerns, but you get in the meeting and there's so much on the agenda and there's all these other people around the table. It's sometimes difficult to just get your thoughts together to communicate your concerns in a kind of succinct way. Having prepared this ahead of time and handing it out at the meeting, or even handing it out prior to the meeting and asking people to review it, really gives you an opportunity to participate more effectively in sharing at that IEP team meeting. So now I want you to just picture one more thing. Picture this: your student, your child succeeding. Who's better to introduce your child to others than you, the parent? And by going through the process to develop this snapshot, you will have determined what's most important to you and your child, and you'll be able to better communicate those concerns and expectations in clear and effective ways. The student snapshot really is an effective tool in the parent and school partnership, and without that partnership, we can't make good things happen for kids. So by creating and distributing the student snapshot to those who will play a role in your child's day at school, you're going to be paving the way to a more positive and productive school day and interactions. You'll help put a face rather than a label on your child, and in so doing, you will be helping to set your child up for school success.